I never believed in signs, but the night she said yes felt like the universe finally looked at me and nodded. I remember staring at my phone after her message came through, reading it again and again, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. My hands were shaking, and I hated myself for that. Hated how much power a single word from her had over me. Yes, such a small word, yet it carried months of quiet hope, stolen glances, and conversations I replayed alone in my room like they were sacred. I told myself not to overthink it, but my heart didn't listen. It raced ahead, already building a future from one simple answer. I had known her for a long time before that night. Not closely, not in the way lovers know each other, but enough to feel like she mattered. She was someone I trusted, without realizing when that trust had begun. We talked often, sometimes late into the night, sometimes only in passing, but every interaction stayed with me longer than it should have. I learned the sound of her laughter through text, the pauses she made before answering difficult questions, the way she avoided talking about certain parts of her life. I never pushed. I thought patience was proof of love. I thought waiting made me worthy. The day of the date felt unreal. I woke up early, my chest tight with nervous excitement, staring at the ceiling like it might give me answers. I chose my clothes carefully, then changed them again and again, until frustration replaced anxiety. I wanted to look like myself, but also like someone she could want. That contradiction sat heavy on me. I kept telling myself this was just a date, just two people talking, but my heart didn't believe the lie. For me, this wasn't just a night out. This was a test of everything I had felt in silence. When I saw her, standing there waiting, something inside me softened. She smiled when she noticed me, and for a second the world narrowed down to that single expression. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. I remember thinking how easy it would be to fall apart if that smile ever disappeared. We walked together, our steps unsure at first, like we were learning a new rhythm. The air between us felt warm, full of unspoken expectations. I told myself this was what connection felt like. We talked about simple things at first: work, memories, small jokes that didn't mean much but made the silence comfortable. I listened closely, the way you do when every word matters. When she talked, I leaned in without realizing it. I wanted to catch every detail, every change in her tone. She asked me questions too, and that made my chest swell with quiet pride. I felt important. I felt chosen. For once, I wasn't the one chasing from behind. I was sitting right across from her, sharing a moment that felt real. Still, there were moments when something didn't sit right. Though I pushed the feeling away, sometimes her eyes drifted past me, like she was looking for something else in the room. Sometimes she paused before answering, her smile arriving a second too late. I noticed how often she checked her phone, how quickly she turned the screen away when I glanced up. Each time, a small knot tightened in my stomach, but I untied it with excuses. She's busy, she's nervous, I'm just overthinking. I didn't want doubt to ruin what I had waited so long for. As the night went on, I found myself opening up more than I planned. I talked about things I usually kept buried: my fears, my failures, the loneliness I never admitted out loud. She listened quietly, nodding at the right moments, touching her glass like it anchored her. When she reached across the table and brushed my hand, my breath caught. That simple contact felt intimate, almost dangerous. I told myself this was connection, that this was how trust was built. I didn't notice how easily I was giving pieces of myself away. There were moments when she asked questions that felt oddly specific, not about my feelings, but about my life in ways that felt measured. She asked about people I knew, situations I had been part of, things I never expected to explain on a first date. I laughed it off, answering honestly, thinking she was just curious. I wanted to be open. I wanted to show her there was nothing hidden about me. Looking back, I realize how willing I was to expose myself just to keep her interest. Time moved strangely that night, stretching and folding in on itself. Part of me wanted it to end, so I could sit alone and replay every moment, and another part wanted it to last forever. I kept watching her face, trying to read what she wasn't saying. Sometimes she looked at me with something that felt like warmth, and other times there was distance, like a wall I couldn't see but felt pressing against my chest. I told myself all relationships had moments like that, I told myself love wasn't perfect. At one point, I excused myself and stepped away, needing air, needing to calm the storm of thoughts in my head. As I stood there, I heard my name, not spoken loudly, not meant for me to hear. It came from her voice, low and careful, followed by a quiet laugh that didn't sound the way it had when she laughed with me. My body frowncy. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I told myself it was nothing, that I was misreading the moment, but something deep inside me shifted. When I returned, she looked the same, smiled the same, spoke the same, and yet everything felt different. I felt like I was sitting across from someone wearing a familiar face, but carrying a secret I wasn't meant to know. I stayed. No, I stayed because hope is stubborn, and because I didn't want the night to end with questions I wasn't ready to answer. I walked her home later, listening to her talk while my thoughts screamed in silence. When we finally parted, she hugged me, and I held on just a second longer than I should have. As I watched her walk away, I told myself this was the beginning of something beautiful. I told myself not to doubt, not to question, not to ruin a good thing with fear. But as I stood there alone, the quiet felt heavier than before. I didn't know it yet, but that night wasn't the start of a love story. It was the moment my life began to change. The moment the truth broke me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the date like it was a crime scene. And I was finally brave enough to look closely. Her smile, her questions, the way she laughed into her phone when she thought I wasn't listening. Each memory came back sharper, heavier, until my chest felt tight and my throat burned. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was letting fear ruin something good. But deep down, I already knew. Hope was just the last lie I was holding on to. The next day, I woke up to a message from her. It was casual, light, almost sweet. She asked if I got home safe. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. A part of me wanted to confront her right then, to ask her what that phone call was about, who she had laughed with when she said my name like it was a joke. But I didn't. I answered the way she expected me to. Calm, normal, trusting. I hated myself a little for that, but I wasn't ready to face the truth yet. Over the next few days, we kept talking. She acted exactly the same as before, maybe even more attentive. She asked more questions now, deeper ones, about my past, my mistakes, the people I used to trust. I noticed how carefully she listened, how she never interrupted, how she remembered details I didn't even think were important. It should have made me feel valued. Instead, it made me uneasy. It felt like I was being studied, not loved. The truth came to me by accident, the way most painful truths do. A mutual friend mentioned her name in a conversation, casually, without knowing what it would do to me. He laughed and said something about her finally getting close to me. When I asked what he meant, his smile faded. He hesitated. That pause was louder than any confession. I pushed, my heart pounding, my hands cold. That's when the words came out, awkward and rushed, like he wanted them back the moment he said them. She hadn't come into my life by chance. She had been sent there by her own need, her own anger, her own plan. Someone I had once trusted had hurt her deeply, and I was connected to that person in a way she couldn't reach directly. I wasn't the target. I was the bridge. The date wasn't about me. It never was. It was about access, information, and revenge. I remember sitting there, listening, nodding, pretending I understood, while something inside me shattered quietly. There was no dramatic scream, no sudden rage, just a deep, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. Every kind word she had spoken, every gentle look, every moment I had replayed with hope now felt fake, rehearsed, planned. I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. I felt small. I felt used. When I confronted her, I didn't do it the way I had imagined in my head. There was no shouting, no accusations thrown like knives. I just asked one simple question, looking straight into her eyes. She frowned. For a second, the mask slipped. That was all I needed. She tried to explain after that, to soften the truth with excuses. She said she didn't mean for it to go this far. She said she didn't expect to feel guilty. She even said she liked me, as if that somehow made it better. I listened in silence. Every word felt heavier than the last. I realized something then that hurt more than the betrayal itself. She knew what she was doing from the start. She knew my feelings before she agreed to the date. She knew exactly how much this would hurt me, and she came anyway. That wasn't confusion. That was a choice. When she finished talking, she waited for my reaction. I could see it in her eyes. She expected anger, tears, maybe forgiveness. What she got instead was emptiness. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't ask her to stay. I just nodded slowly, stood up, and walked away. I don't think she expected that. I don't think she understood that silence can be louder than rage. The days that followed were the worst. Not because of her, but because of what her betrayal forced me to face in myself. I realized how easily I had given my trust, how desperate I had been to feel chosen. I replayed every moment I ignored the warning signs, every excuse I made for her behavior. I wasn't just mourning the loss of her. I was mourning the version of myself that believed love was always honest. There were nights I couldn't breathe properly, nights when the memory of her voice felt like a wound reopening. I felt angry, then ashamed for feeling angry. I felt weak for caring so much, then angry at myself for feeling weak. The emotions came in waves, crashing into each other until I didn't know which one was real anymore. But slowly, something else began to grow beneath the pain. Clarity. I started to see the situation for what it was, not what I wanted it to be. I wasn't unlucky. I wasn't unworthy. I had been manipulated by someone who saw my kindness as an opportunity. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. I stopped blaming myself for her choices. I stopped rewriting the story to make her look innocent. I didn't seek revenge right away, not in the way movies make it look. I didn't expose her. I didn't warn everyone. I did something quieter, something harder. I stepped back and watched. I let her plans fall apart on their own, without my cooperation, without my trust. Everything she had built began to crack. Karma didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with silence, with closed doors, with opportunities she could no longer reach. As for me, I changed in ways I didn't expect. I became more careful with my words, my emotions, my heart, not colder, just stronger. I learned that love without boundaries is self-destruction. I learned that not everyone who smiles at you deserves access to your soul. And most importantly, I learned that survival sometimes means walking away without closure. I still think about her sometimes, not with longing, not with hate, but with a quiet understanding. She was a lesson I didn't ask for but needed. The betrayal didn't end me. It stripped me down to the truth of who I was and forced me to rebuild myself from there. I didn't come out of that experience unscarred, but I came out awake. What grew after the damage, after everything came apart? My life didn't collapse the way I thought it would. There was no dramatic fall, no moment where I hit the ground and stayed there. Instead, there was a strange quiet. My days became slower, heavier, like I was moving through water. I went to work, answered messages, smiled when required, but inside I felt hollow, not empty in a clean way. Hollow like something had been taken without permission and left a rough edge behind. For a long time, I thought healing meant forgetting her. I tried to push her out of my thoughts, bury every memory, avoid places that reminded me of that night. But the harder I tried to erase her, the louder she became in my mind. I realized then that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about understanding what she represented in my life. She wasn't just a person who betrayed me. She was the mirror that showed me how much of myself I had been giving away without protection. I began spending more time alone, not because I was lonely, but because I needed silence. In that silence, I started hearing my own thoughts clearly for the first time. I saw how often I had put other people's needs before my own, how often I had mistaken patience for love and sacrifice for loyalty. I saw how easily I excused behavior that hurt me just to keep people close. These realizations didn't come gently. They hurt, but they felt honest. I also heard things about her during that time. Not directly from her. She never reached out again, but through fragments of conversation. Quiet updates from people who didn't know how much it mattered to me. Her plans hadn't worked the way she expected. The people she tried to use began to see through her. Trust dried up around her like water in the sun. I didn't feel joy hearing this. I felt something calmer, a sense that the universe didn't need my anger to balance things out. That's when I understood something important. Karma doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like isolation. Sometimes it looks like repeating the same mistakes with different faces. Sometimes it looks like being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. I didn't need to destroy her. She was already doing that to herself. As her presence faded from my life, something else took its place. Confidence. Slowly and quietly, I started setting boundaries, even when it felt uncomfortable. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't try to understand me. I learned to say no without guilt. These changes weren't dramatic, but they were powerful. For the first time, I felt like I was living my life instead of auditioning for someone else's approval. There were moments when the pain came back unexpectedly. A song, a smell, a familiar laugh in a crowded room. In those moments, my chest still tightened, but I didn't panic anymore. I let the feeling pass through me instead of fighting it. I reminded myself that pain wasn't proof of weakness. It was proof that I had loved deeply, and that capacity was still mine, just better protected now. I began to understand that betrayal had not ruined me. It had refined me. It had burned away illusions I clung to and left behind something more solid. I no longer rushed emotional connections. I listened more than I spoke. I watched how people treated others when they thought no one was paying attention. Trust became something earned, not assumed. Sometimes I wondered if she ever thought about me the way I thought about her in those early days. Not with regret, but with awareness. I wondered if she ever realized what she lost by using someone who would have stood beside her without conditions. But those thoughts grew quieter over time. They mattered less as my own life began to matter more. I started focusing on myself in ways I never had before. My goals became clearer. My priorities shifted. I invested energy into things that gave something back instead of draining me. I wasn't chasing happiness anymore. I was building stability, and happiness began to visit on its own. One night, months later, I found myself back near the same place where our date had happened. I stood there for a moment, watching people walk past, laughing, talking, living their own complicated stories. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for surviving something that could have harmed me completely but didn't. I realized then that I wasn't the same person who had waited nervously for a yes. That version of me had been innocent, open, unguarded. I didn't judge him for that anymore. I honored him. He loved honestly in a world that doesn't always reward honesty. And because of him, I learned how to love myself without losing myself. The betrayal had taken something from me, yes, but it also gave me clarity, strength, and direction. I stopped seeing my past as a mistake and started seeing it as preparation. I wasn't healed completely. Maybe I never would be, but I was grounded, awake, real, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The person I became after, I didn't wake up one day feeling healed. There was no clear moment where the past stopped hurting or where I could say I was finally free. What happened instead was slower and more honest. I woke up one morning and realized she wasn't the first thought in my head. That realization startled me more than the pain ever had. It felt like standing in a quiet room after years of noise and suddenly hearing my own breathing again. Life moved on, the way it always does, indifferent to what I had lost and what I had gained. People came and went. Conversations started and ended. Opportunities appeared that I would have ignored before because I was too busy trying to be enough for someone else. No, I paid attention. I showed up differently. I spoke with intention. I walked away when something didn't feel right, even if it meant standing alone for a while. I noticed how people reacted to the new version of me. Some were drawn closer, curious about the calm confidence I carried. Others drifted away, uncomfortable with the boundaries I no longer explained or apologized for. I didn't chase them. I understood that not everyone is meant to stay when you stop being easy to use. That understanding didn't make me bitter. It made me selective. There were moments when I thought about reaching out to her, not to rekindle anything, but to close the story properly, to say the words that never got spoken. But each time, I stopped myself. I realized closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from accepting that you may never be understood by them and choosing peace anyway. Silence became my final answer, and it felt stronger than any speech I could have given. One evening, as I watched the city lights from my window, I thought about who I used to be. The version of me who believed love was something you earned by enduring pain. The version of me who thought patience meant staying, no matter the cost. I didn't feel embarrassed by that person anymore. I felt compassion. He did the best he could with the understanding he had at the time. And because of his mistakes, I learned how to protect my heart without closing it. I understood then that betrayal had not been the worst thing that happened to me. Losing myself would have been worse. And for a while, I came dangerously close, but I found my way back. Not by being rescued, but by choosing myself when it mattered most. That choice changed everything. Sometimes, late at night, her memory still surfaced not as pain, but as a shadow, a reminder. I let it pass without resistance. I no longer needed to rewrite the story to make sense of it. The truth was simple. She came into my life for her reasons. I survived for mine. I began to see my life not as a series of losses, but as a process of refinement. Every disappointment had stripped away something false. Every heartbreak had pushed me closer to who I was meant to become. I wasn't colder. I wasn't closed off. I was clearer. I knew what I deserved, and I no longer begged for it. The strangest part was this: if she stood in front of me now, I don't think she would recognize me. Not because I changed my face or my voice, but because she met me at a time when I was still giving myself away for free. That version of me no longer exists, and I don't miss him the way I thought I would. I respect him. I carry him forward, but I don't live there anymore. I learned that love should never feel like a test you're constantly failing. It should feel safe, mutual, and real. And if it doesn't, walking away is not weakness, it's wisdom. She said yes to the date, and for a long time, I believed that moment defined me. Now I understand the truth. It wasn't her yes that changed my life. It was what I learned after her betrayal. I didn't lose a love story that night. I lost an illusion, and in its place, I found myself.